Pals. Welcome to this chapter's edition of the Ambition Series podcast that we've been featuring really since the pandemic. For those of you that are new to this podcast, I wanted to start this podcast really to do two things. One, I wanted to recognize excellence from a performance perspective across our account management and our professional recruiting and recruiting ranks. And the second is, I think over the last year, we have experienced one of the most challenging years professionally any of us have really faced, right? And I think, true leadership is really about one's ability to maintain your ambition during turbulent times and really just kind of being able to maintain that and continue to drive for success. So this podcast I created or conversation I created is to highlight those that I think have truly embodied that. And have really sort of set the standard as it relates to maintaining their ambition. So this morning, I'm joined with Keely Benner. Keely, how's it going?
Going good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, and just to real quick introduce Keely, I wanted to bring her on here. She's an account manager out of the Detroit office. She has been in sales for a year, and she has had an outstanding career so far in the account management role. She hit 15K in spread. And I think that there is a lot to be learned from her story of just standing up her territory while being remote the whole time, right? And, if I could give any of our listeners just kind of a perspective to have while we have this conversation is, there's a lot of new AMs out there, right? There's a lot of people that are still experiencing turbulence within their territory. And hopefully you can learn something from Keely's approach in our discussion that you can hopefully take back to your territory and implement into your day-to-day performance. So let's just get it kicked off. Keely, how's it going? Tell me a little bit about just like your last year. Tell me about your career in sales and kind of how we've gotten to this point.
Yeah, it's a loaded question just because it's been a year, but it hasn't felt like it's been that long. And I always like to say, I feel like I've really taken it day by day since the pandemic started. Like you mentioned, my first day of being an account manager alone was the first day we went remote. So being an account manager is already scary. When you're new to the role, you've never been independent. You always have somebody watching you and designee or your sales manager right next to you giving you advice. But it was definitely an adjustment having to kind of figure it out myself. And I mean, like I said, I take it day by day. I think the hardest part was the first 6 months or so because you're just learning how to stand up your territory, taking a solid rec. All of the little things that really matter are kind of what happens in the first 6 months of building that really strong foundation. So with the pandemic and the economy not being that great, I really didn't have a ton of recs. Nobody really did. And it took me about 6 months or so to even lock up my first start. And then it wasn't even until last December, I was still hardly at commission. I actually think I was below commission before the new year. And then February, literally a few months ago, I broke commission and then went to 15K. So it was a crazy ride, but it's like the beginning was definitely the hardest, but I think the adversity I faced in the first year and a big chunk of it taught me how to be intentional. And it gave me the time to slow down and really focus on one thing at a time, day in and day out. And
Sure.
Obviously couldn't have done it without the support of Monica Mashake as my sales manager. So
that's awesome. So real quick, just to pause you there. So you literally got promoted on the first day of us going remote.
Yep. So I was promoted in the office, got my fun balloons and everything, took the pictures, everything everybody loves. But I was only in the office the first 2 weeks of doing my prep for all of my accounts. So you and I hopped on a call. I was telling you about the accounts I would be selling, what my strategy was. Went to Chicago for the weekend, came back that Monday, and we were fully remote. So I really had to go on my first meeting by myself in my apartment. And I mean, I hadn't even worked on a laptop yet. So that was also.
Yeah. I mean, what's wild for me to think about is I think about when I got promoted and I literally, had a sales manager on the road with me almost every day, holding my hand, guiding me. I think this is what I worry about most with some of our new promotions. It's exactly what you just said, right? Like you get promoted and then it's a remote world. I'm actually have a question I'm just curious about. Have you met any of your customers in person yet?
No, I haven't actually. I feel like I have because I'll still
Sure.
do virtual drinks, some fun stuff like that. And I feel like I know them just from talking on the phone with them, doing the QVMs, but no, I've never met one of my customers in person. I feel like I would be so nervous if I had to go meet them right now.
Right. No, but that's I think that's just a testament to your story though too, right? Like I think about like we were changing the sales process, we were aligning sales framework, everything was changing, right? When you got promoted. And I think you just did such a good job clearly of kind of adjusting to that world, right? And finding a way to add value, which I think is really good stuff. So you had mentioned that like when you first started out, first 6 months was the hardest. What made it the hardest for the first 6 months? And what was kind of the turning point? Like what kind of made it where you're like, okay, like now I'm getting some traction. Now I'm feeling it like from a requirement flow and relationship perspective.
Yeah, so it's funny because when I was going through it, I don't think I was thinking this is really hard. Like I'm struggling really hard right now. I think it's more so looking back, seeing where I am today and being like, wait, that was actually probably the hardest part because you kind of just black out and you take it day by day. But Monica always told me like the first 6 months of being an account manager is the hardest. And I was always like, really? Like, I feel like I'm fine right now. But that's because I had an amazing support system and she made me feel like I wasn't alone during it. But I think the first 6 months looking back were the hardest just because you're still mastering cold calling, setting meetings. A lot of the places you're calling on, you don't have a ton of traction with. So you're really just building everything from the ground up. Obviously, business wasn't booming in the Motor City for Ford and GM, which are our main accounts. So a lot of account managers had to shift on what they were selling. Even 20, 30K account managers had to be creative with that. So to start myself off, I had to be creative as well. I wasn't getting business handed over to me that was fully ready to go. There were definitely some really great accounts that I had the opportunity to support. But aside from that, it was really me figuring out where to go, how to do it. And I started calling on this account in the Upper Peninsula just because, you need new meetings, you need to get your activity up. And I just did it. And I ended up breaking that account. They had fully remote contract opportunities. And that was my first start in August. But I think that's just an example of kind of taking it to the next step and
Sure.
being creative, not necessarily because I'm the most creative or innovative person in the world, because I'm not, but just figuring out like, what can I do here to make some movement and be creative during this time. And I think that the first 6 months were very intentional, like I mentioned. So I had to go in every single day and figure out like, what do I want to accomplish today to feel successful? Because if I don't do that, I'm not going to feel successful. We're not locking up starts right now. We're not bringing in recs. We're not sending tons of candidates. We're not confirming a ton of interviews. So it was really about what can I do to feel successful and good about my day. So Monica and I would work together to have daily goals, figure out what it is that I want to make traction on. And I think every day that we did that ended up being the big movement toward being successful. And I think when I finally felt a shift and I started to feel the success was probably toward the end of last year, because once things were getting better with our economy and the accounts we were selling, I was able to support an org at Ford Motor Company that was very important and we needed some extra support on. But I think my hard work and dedication to my business during the first 8 months of my career gave me the opportunity to sell that org. And they didn't tell me that it was not important. They said, this is the most important org right now. We really need somebody to work really hard and come through on this. And that's a lot of pressure. But I took it head on and I was excited for the opportunity to come through and just going on more meetings there, building my relationships, building out the org, identifying recs. That's when I really started to see the movement and feel really successful, when I actually had the opportunity to execute everything that I was practicing the first year.
Well, a couple of things. I love a few of the things that you just said, right? What I'm actually hearing there, right, is that an opportunity arose at Ford Motor Company, and why did we bestow that opportunity on you, right? It was because you were doing all the little things right in the beginning of your career, and you were following the process, and you were communicating, and you were you know, constantly having an approach of like, I'm going to find a way, right? Sometimes I tell account managers this, things happen in staffing, right? People get promoted, people move offices, we break accounts, right? And all of a sudden it's kind of like, you know, the people that have been doing things the right way, following our process, doing it with the right attitude, they're the people that we turn to first when those things pop up, right? And I think in your case, it was a foregone conclusion that I was like, oh yeah, we're going to add Keely to that because of the way you were operating, right? And the second thing, I'm actually curious. You brought this up a few times. You keep saying day by day, like one day at a time, right? And you were talking about getting traction. Like, could you like just drop down a level, right, for me on that? And like, you know, for new account managers out there, right, where you know they're just promoted now, they're at the 3-month mark of their career. What does that mean? Like, what were the things that you and Monica were landing on a little bit, where you're like, this is traction today. This is like I'm having a successful day. What like were some of the things that you were looking at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in the beginning, it was just an activity goal. Back to your designee ways, how many meetings you want to have set, how many meetings you want to have off, making sure that you're diversifying yourself to set you up for success. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. And then having targeted leads, people that you know have open business, maybe researching a few accounts on LinkedIn, prospecting who may be hiring. And then once you're taking a step further, once you're making traction on those accounts, pulling referrals. How many referrals do you want to pull this week? How many org charts do you want to make this week? How many QVMs do you want to have off this week? And just taking it a step further each time. And we still do that today. How many final round interviews do you want to confirm this week? How many interview times to hit do you want to bring in this week? Let's get 50% of your openings to exclusive this week. So it never really changes. It's just depending on what level you're at, like what is your focus going to be today and for this week? And week after week, you'll start to get more advanced and start to be able to focus on the full life cycle of it.
I love that, because even what I'm hearing, I think sometimes, yeah, people focus on the end result. I want to lock up starts, right? But what I'm actually hearing with your approach is you drop down a level, and it's no, if I have a rec, what's realistic on this rec this week, right? Maybe not lock it up, but get it in the final stages of the interview process. Or maybe it's literally just have a candidate lined up for an interview by the end of the week, right? And then, you know, how about looking at our QVMs, our sales frameworks? Like, I love how your goals are kind of all encompassing, it sounds like, right, of what needs to happen today, and use that as your measure, right? I always had an interesting analogy that I liked using, right? It's like the law of incremental gains, right? And it's really, you know, any given day, there's not that much difference between someone that is doing everything the right, not cutting corners, versus someone that is not, right? And if you could have a mentality on what is success every day, it's like, if you were to program a robot, right, to do your job every day, what would you program that robot to do, right? And think about that in the account management world. Well, it'd be friggin' cold calling at 7:30. It would be, you know, communicating with my recruiters. It would be pulling leads. It would be updating real-time leads. It would be asking for referrals every time, you know, I'm on meetings. And thinking like, okay, whatever I program the robot to do, that's now my mark for success on the day, right? It's not the end goal. It's not the byproducts. It's not spread. It's literally just every day, like, am I doing everything in my power that I can do today to be successful? And I love your message of just like day by day, because that's kind of what you're saying, right? It was like, I'm just going to just show up every day to do the best that I can. And then incrementally, my spread's going to grow as a byproduct of that. And I love that approach, and it's worked for you. Right?
Yeah, and I don't think it stops, because even right now, I mean, I hit 15K end of April, and I've locked up a few starts since then, but things are slowing down a little bit. So it's like any time things are slowing down, or maybe like a little bit of adversity is coming, that's when you can just focus back in and say, like, am I doing everything I can, and what can I be better at today, and what can I be better at this week? Like last week for me, it was recalling all of my recs, because I wasn't feeling that good about them. But being able to look at the situation, what can I do better? There's always an area we can improve on. There's never somebody who's going to do it perfect every single time. So yeah, I think it's something that's just a good thing to keep in mind, no matter if you're a 30K AM or a 0K AM like I was.
Absolutely. For you. So question for you. you brought up Monica a lot throughout this discussion, and I think it's an interesting question that I'd like to ask you, especially when you're standing up your career, right? How have you looked at your sales manager, Monica? How have you partnered with your sales manager? How was communication between you two? Like, just tell me a little bit more about like that and kind of how you approach that.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on for hours, probably get a little bit emotional too, because I don't know what I would do without her. I think we like are, I like to be managed the way she manages, and she likes to manage the way I like to be managed. So it just worked out kind of well. But I think that what's been most helpful is our level of communication. And she'll even make fun of me for it sometimes. I will send so many proactive updates throughout the day, and this woman will just like have all of these things from me, what's happening. Like I just won't stop with my updates just to be transparent on what's happening and what's going on in my day-to-day. And it makes me feel better about like putting it all out there and knowing that she is in the know on everything that I'm making movement on. So I think the most helpful thing has been over communicating. And I think from her perspective, the best thing that she has done as a sales manager is making sure that we're all feeling good on a daily basis. When I was a newer account manager, she would call me probably 3 times a day. Sometimes I would have to like wipe a tear and pick up the phone, but she was calling at the right time. And even now she still checks in with me. She's always making sure I'm feeling good. So I think it's just having a really good communication method with your sales manager, being honest with how you're feeling. I think they can't help you with what you're struggling with or make changes to what your business is if they don't really know what adversity you're facing at the time. So I always just like to be transparent with what I think is going on, what I might need help with that week. And she's always the first to step up to go on the meetings with me, recall a rec if needed, and help me in any way I can. So, I mean, overall, she's just the most supportive person in the entire world, and she's got our back. I mean, I feel like I'm not going to fail because I have her backing me up as a sales manager. And I think that's something that I'm really lucky to say and to have, because I mean, it'd be hard to do it out here alone and not feeling like somebody has your back. So I'm just grateful that I have her.
That's amazing. And yes, Monica Shakis is one of the best. And I'll tell you what, like what you just said is like music to my ears, right? Of like, if our new account managers, if all of our account managers could just adhere to that advice, right? Like what I'm hearing is communication, right? We were talking about a lot about like the proactive updates and how you're feeling is transparency, right? What creates angst between an account manager or sales manager relationship is when there's not transparency, right? It's when it's hard to know where they're at. I haven't heard from the account manager before. I don't know what they're struggling with. Right. And I just love your approach of like, you were pretty much just like, I'm just going to tell you everything that's happening with me. And then we'll attack these problems together. Right. All gaps are good gaps. And it's kind of one of those deals where it's like, unless you're locking up start after start after start, I almost want all of our account managers to have the mentality of like, yeah, you should be communicating with your account manager or with your sales manager every day. Right. Because like there are gaps and you are working to get better. And that's the approach to have. And then the last point that I love that you just brought up was telling them how you're feeling, right? When we talk about just kind of like vulnerability, right? I think sometimes people will say, oh, go be vulnerable, or, you have to be vulnerable the way you're dealing with situations. I think some people think of vulnerability as this place where it's like, I need to go tell them that I'm feeling this emotion, or I have anxiety, or I'm depressed, or something like that's happening. That's not what vulnerability is in the workplace. Yes, it is, and communicate that, and we're here for that as well. But it's really about like what's stressing you out about work, right? Making it safe to be like, hey, I'm struggling to get meetings set. Hey, I don't really believe in my accounts that I'm calling on. Hey, I don't feel confident running sales framework meetings, right? It's so important to be vulnerable and voice and communicate that, because then we can help. Then our leaders, like Monica's did with you, can be like, all right, I'm going to get in the boat with you. And we're going to tackle this problem together and figure it out.
Yeah,
right? And
I love
that. I just love I love your mentality. I love your approach. It's like there's no surprise that you've been able to find the success that you have, right? Having your just kind of day by day approach, breaking it down incrementally, right? In your partnership with your sales manager. I just think it's awesome. So
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest one. And I think it's something that is always important to have. Because if you don't have the support and you don't feel supported on a day-to-day basis, it's hard to do it alone.
totally.
So
Yeah. Well, and if that's your answer, that's fine. But I always like to close these podcasts or these interviews with just kind of, what would you recommend or what advice would you have for an account manager, right? That's sort of new in their territory, recently got promoted. We just did a lot of new promotions in the Alpha region. What advice would you have for any of those people or recruiter ones, right? That are working towards the promotion.
Yeah, I think the number one word I can use is, well, the two things I will say is intentionality. So being super intentional every single day to know that you're working your hardest and you're going to achieve your end goal. And the second thing would be working hard and trusting the process. I guess that's number 3. I think those are my 3 things that I did to become promoted and to be successful with my sales territory is just being really intentional on a day-to-day basis, breaking down what your daily goal is, how are you going to get there, whether it's being a designee, setting meetings, doing a sales framework deck, or whether it's being an account manager, going on meetings again, implementing QVMs, whatever it may be. And then as long as you're working hard and giving it your all and you can shut your laptop at the end of the day being like, hey, I just busted my ass. I just did everything I can for the day and trust the process. It's all going to work out. Because I truly don't think you can fail in this job if you just work very, very hard, you're intentional, and you trust the process.
I love it. Well, that is a great message for us to end on. Keely, great job. I mean, you have had an outstanding run over the last year. I could not be happier for you to be at 15K, tracking for your first contest. It's very inspirational. And hopefully some people were able to learn a little bit about one of our top performers' mentality and the way that she approaches her day. So great job.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thank you. All right.
That's good.